9:15 a.m. as we continue with the broadcast this morning. Now, do we truly realize, do we truly appreciate how deep in trouble are we economically in this country? And looking at South Africa and how the economy has basically gone down over a period of time, but particularly, I would say, in the last 10 or 12 years, because there was a time where South Africa, and even at the time with the Mbeki administration, Trevor Manuel being the finance minister, South Africa was relatively debt free. But now we are in a dire situation. We are in a desperate situation. We are in tremendous trouble as the Efficient Group Chief Economist, Dawie Roodt, has made a mention of. And we are going across now to be joined by Dawie Roodt, the Chief Economist at the Efficient Group. Dawie, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much and good morning to you. Thank you for the invite.
Yes, Dawie, the question I raise is, do we really truly realize, do we really appreciate the fact that we are in deep, deep, deep trouble?
Well, I think there are many individuals out there realizing that they are individually in very deep trouble. Now, my job as an economist is that I don't look at individuals, I look at groups. I look at the economy, I look at the macro economy. So I sort of pick up trends and I try to make sense of all of this. Of course, there are many individuals that are doing very, very well, and many businesses that are really thriving under difficult circumstances. But as an economy, as a country, we are indeed in very, very deep trouble. And as an economist, like I've said, I look at averages. Like, for example, the average South African today has been getting poorer for the past, say, 10 years or so. On average, the unemployment levels has been going up, and quite a lot. And something but I'm particularly concerned about is that we start witnessing something that we haven't seen for a long time, and that's absolute levels of poverty is actually going up. Absolute levels of poverty means that people are going to bed hungry. And as an economist, I can tell you all these sort of things are happening because the economy is just not growing. And there are many reasons why the economy is just not growing. Remember, economic growth is the creation of wealth. And wealth creation is what we actually need, because wealth creation is something that will reduce unemployment and will reduce poverty and absolute poverty. And so wealth creation is a good thing. Good economic growth is a good thing. And we just do not have sufficient and strong enough economic growth to reduce all those numbers that I've been referring to. Now, the question is why, and we can talk about that perhaps as well.
Well, exactly. And I think, as you raise the question, is why. And looking at South Africa, there was a time, in the point I had made, that even right up to the point with the Mbeki administration, South Africa was relatively debt free. But then, when the rot had basically set in, this is where our problems had actually started. And we can talk about external issues, we can talk about Russia,
Yeah.
we can talk about Ukraine, we can talk about 2008, the meltdown, we can talk about all those things. But internally, we have got serious problems, Dawie.
Without a doubt, we created most of these problems, I'm afraid to say. If you refer to the period that you're referring to, around about 2000 or so, the South Africa, of course, there were ups and downs. It's not a straight line up. But during the Mbeki era, things were actually going quite well in South Africa. We had guys like, for example, Trevor Manuel as the Minister of Finance then. We have to say, however, it was also the honeymoon period for South Africa, being readmitted back into the international environment. But what is very important then is the authorities or the government then they managed the fiscal accounts much better. Trevor Manuel was doing a really splendid job. He was a little bit lucky, let's be honest about this, but he didn't spend too much money. He didn't spend money we did not have. The past 10 years, things started going horribly wrong. And it started going horribly wrong because government started spending money that we simply did not have. The taxpayer is not just capable of carrying this huge tax burden, and government has been borrowing like there's no tomorrow. And I can give you all the numbers. State debt as a percentage of GDP today is in excess of 70%. If you look at the state-owned enterprises only, that is Eskom and the other state-owned enterprises like the Post Office and the NEL and all of those, then that in itself is 10% to GDP. And that is mostly guaranteed by government. So if you put that together, we have got state debt in excess of 80% to GDP. And the local authorities, they are falling apart. That's very important, the local authorities, because if you want to start a business, the local authorities must work. 70% of them are financially simply not viable anymore. And the list goes on and the list goes on. So if you, I'm afraid everything, and again, the fingers are pointing to government, pointing to the ANC government mostly, because in many cases they've been simply mismanaging these sort of things. And we are in a position, in a situation today, we have very weak economic growth. The state is financially simply not capable of supporting us. We have, as it is, more than 30 million people receiving some sort of aid from the state every month, and we cannot afford that anymore. And the only sustainable answer to all of this is to get this economy growing. And I'm afraid I don't see that happening soon.
Well, certainly, and also, when you're talking about mismanagement, how deliberate has this mismanagement been? Is it about we don't have the capacity to deal with it? Do we have the skills? But and are there deliberate agendas that have been playing out in the background?
I think without a doubt, all you need to do is just go and have a look at the Zondo Commission. But it's not only deliberate things. I think there are some ideological problems as well. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Pravin Gordhan, for example, he's a real communist. And I've studied communism. It's really interesting, and maybe one day we can have a discussion about what it means, the difference between communism and other systems and so on. But he's a real, the government that we have is a left-leaning government. And Pravin Gordhan is a real communist at heart, and that's what he says. But unfortunately, many of his colleagues, they don't support his ideology, which is the wrong ideology to start off with. But many of his colleagues are simply crooks. They are simply crooks. So he's got an ideological idea. He's got a certain plan to fix things, but it never works. And I think he must be one of the most frustrated people in this country. And it doesn't work because many of his colleagues in the administration and maybe I can go as far as saying even in cabinet, are just not interested in growing the economy. They are only interested in lining their own pockets. And there are so many examples of that. Just look at the Zondo Commission. So I'm afraid to say that much of this was actually intentional. It's that the ANC government is there in many instances, not always, many instances for one reason only, and that is for the ANC.
Well, Dawie, from what you've described, and you speak about 32 million people that rely on the state, we know the high levels of poverty, the unemployment, the rising costs, and we are sitting on a powder keg, the time
Yeah.
bomb, and this is a scary thought. When is this going to explode? Because the situation is extremely volatile.
Yeah, let me repeat those numbers. There are 30 million people that get a grant from the state every month. There are 2 million people that are employed by the state. 32 million people get an income from the state every month. The state's finances are in dire strait. I must just add that in the short term, the last couple of months or so, things have been going better than expected on the state finances, especially as far as the revenue is concerned. But we're not out of the hole yet. But the point I want to make, 32 million people get an income from the state every month. We have people that work in South Africa, around about 30, depending on your definition, approximately 13 million people that actually do have jobs in South Africa. And of that 13 million people, about 2 million people pay the bulk of the taxes. So, I mean, these sort of numbers simply do not work. These sort of numbers simply do not add up. So, and this environment with very high levels of unemployment, 44% on the expanded definition, 33% on the narrow definition of unemployment, rising levels of poverty and rising levels of absolute poverty. And in this environment, electricity or energy prices are going up, and more importantly, food prices are going up. Now, this is a toxic mixture of all sort of things, and a small spark can get this whole thing to go completely in the wrong direction. And that's why whenever somebody says they want to go on a strike, Kusata wants to go and strike, lock down the country for a day or whatever, I'm so worried, because that could be just the spark that get this whole thing explode, this whole powder cake, and we could see something similar to what happened in KZN and Gauteng last year. That is something we all need to be aware of the situation. Our political leaders, our religious leaders, our labor leaders, all of us have to be aware that we have a very dangerous situation in South Africa, and we all have to be extremely careful on how we handle that, and very importantly, what we say as well.
Amen. And this is something that one needs to be wary of. But Davi, I know our president, for instance, has been right across the entire world recently. Even when he went down for the Queen's funeral, he spoke to people like Joe Biden, and seems to be reliant, and also seems quite positive when it comes to foreign investment in the country. And if you were a foreign investor, Davi, I mean, would you invest in this country?
Well, of course, I will invest in South Africa. I will invest in places like, for example, in the mines, because commodity price is nice and high. The problem is, but once I've invested in the mines, I can't get my stuff out because Transnet is not working properly, or the harbors are not working properly. But despite that, it's still quite profitable to invest in mines in South Africa. Another place where I will invest in, I will invest in our financial markets. Our financial markets are very liquid, very well regulated, very much integrated with the rest of the world, and provide very nice returns. So yes, I will invest in our financial markets. But if you ask me if I will start a new factory, I will say no. And that's what we need. We need new factories, because factories that manufacture stuff will also employ people and pay taxes and all of that. And I will not invest as a foreigner in a factory in South Africa because there's no electricity for one. The other one is that labor relations in South Africa is, we all know what it is like. It's dangerous to live in South Africa. Somebody's going to kill you if you get out of your car, for example. Those are the sort of issues that foreigners are very much aware of. So yes, in some places I will invest, but unfortunately in those places where we really need that investment, people are simply not going to invest in them for the reasons that I've mentioned.
Just looking at the government from a policy perspective, and you are on record saying fixing the problems is relatively easy, but also looking at implementing business friendly policies and leadership. If you could just expand on that, Davi.
Let me give you an example. I think the issue is we don't have an economic problem in South Africa. Well, let me rephrase that. Of course, we've got an economic problem, but fixing our economic problems and fixing our financial problems, we know what the answers are. I can tell you what the answers are. The problem is politics. We're not going to do that because of politics. So let me give you an example of this. Eskom at the moment, they've got 42 odd thousand people working at Eskom. Eskom is demanding an increase of 32 whatever percent, or actually 36%. They want a huge increase in electricity. Eskom is financially not viable. They've got 400 billion rands in debt. So the Eskom is just cannot survive the way it is at the moment. What must happen with Eskom? Well, what needs to happen to Eskom is that, like any other private company, it's not a private company, it belongs to the state. But what should happen, Eskom should be broken into smaller pieces. You have to sell off parts of Eskom, and you need to fire, I'm very sorry to say this, but that's the reality. You need to fire probably 20,000 people. Now imagine you go to Kusatu and tell them, listen, 20,000 of your members will be without a job because we must restructure Eskom. Just imagine what Kusatu is going to do. And that's the political obstacle. The economic answer is easy. Restructure Eskom. Fix Eskom. Get private sector participation. Get rid of a lot of people that should not be there. That's the answer. It's easy to do that. That's the difficult part. And I must tell you, you need a very, very, very strong political leader to actually force through these kind of things that needs to happen in order to fix Eskom. That's one example. But there are many other examples as well, of course.
Well, Davi, there are two issues that stand out: leadership and political will.
Exactly. And that's the issue. Now, look at our president, for example. And I must tell you, I think at the moment we hardly have a government in South Africa. There is so much infighting in the ANC. Literally, some cases they kill one another for positions. So there's so much infighting. There's going to be a new leadership election at the end of this year. It's probably going to be the president will be re-elected again. But they're busy infighting. They're busy fighting one another. They're playing all sort of political games to move around to see who's going to be in top six and all of that. So we won't have a government until after the election, the end of this year. And then, in 1.5 years' time, we've got the general election. And then the emphasis will be on who's going to be elected, how are we going to outwit the opposition. Again, we won't have a government. So I'm afraid for the next 1.5, 2 years, we won't have a government because they're busy with political stuff. They're busy infighting. They're busy fighting elections. We don't have a government that's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's governing the country. And that's why we don't have confidence in the country, and that's why things are falling apart.
Well, Davi, as always, it's wonderful having you with us, and you taking time out. We do appreciate you talking to us here
May,
at Salam Media.
may I just add something, before we get too negative about things like this? The government falling apart is actually creating a lot of opportunities to the private sector, and the private sector is really doing an excellent job on that. And something else that I must point out as well, and that the South African Reserve Bank is doing an excellent job as well. I know what they do is tough. Increasing interest rates is not nice. People don't like that. But Lesetja Kanyako, as the governor of the South African Reserve Bank, is doing an excellent job. Let's support him. But I'm afraid when you look at government, when you talk about the ANC tripartite alliance, I'm afraid we need to make some changes there.
Well, thank you very much for that. And as always, as I mentioned, Dawie, we appreciate your time. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Dawie Roodt joining us this morning, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, and looking at South Africa, analyzing South Africa and where we are economically. The time is just headed for 9:31. We come back, we're going across to Gaza, and we're going to be speaking to Dr. Saeed El Namrouti of the Gaza University, visiting South Africa, and he is here to raise awareness about education in Gaza and also difficulties faced in higher education in the region. We're going to go for a break. We'll be back.